Perfect. Excellent. I don't suppose the background's any better, but I feel more comfortable now.
That's good.
To be honest, the last few interviews I did, none of them were video, so I got lazy and I didn't bother setting the room up anymore. So at least I've put an effort in this time.
I like your background now. I mean, the first one was okay too, but this one's better.
You get a guitar, you get an album, you get the studio a little bit. Yeah, more interesting than looking at my face. So what's your story? You're in a band? You're a producer?
No, I'm actually just a influencer on Instagram, and I've gotten into interviewing bands now.
So is this background real or is that a fake one?
It's not.
It's not. It was really convincing, and I thought it's a long way away. That's a big room, and I saw a slight blur around your head. I thought, oh, okay, that's the background. Okay, fair enough.
I do have guitars, so mine aren't nearly set up like this yet because I'm about to move. So
yeah. So very nice to meet you. Whereabouts are you based?
I'm in Minnesota.
Okay, fantastic. Nice to hear Oblivion Protocol's making its way across the pond. That's fantastic.
It is. By the way, I listened to the 3 singles that were out in there. Fantastic. I love this band.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I have to ask, how did you guys all meet?
Oh, different for each guy. So Darby's the drummer. So he's been out recently with Devon Townsend. He just seems to drum with everybody. I think he's drummed with Robert Plant and with Huey Lewis and the News. I mean, it's ridiculous. His list is like an A-list. And he lives about 400 meters down the road. And I've known him about 10 years and we keep bumping into each other. And every time we do, we say, hey, we should do an album together one day. So when this one came up, I thought, well, I know who I want. Finally, I can get Darby on drums. And it actually turned out that he'd auditioned for my other band, Threshold. Well, no, he nearly auditioned for Threshold back in the 90s, a long time ago when we got our last drummer, Johan. And he just, at the last minute, he decided not to go for it. So he could have been a Threshold drummer, which would have been a strange world. The other one, I've got Root Jolly on guitar from Within Temptation, a Dutch band. I think originally we met him back in the 90s as well. He was in a band called Hard to Be, I think they were called, and they supported Threshold on a couple of shows in Belgium and the Netherlands. So we met him then when we were all young with more hair. And we just kind of stayed in touch. And he's done a couple of things for me with my other project called League of Lights, which I do with my wife. So we worked together before. So he was kind of an easy ask. And then the bass player, Simon Anderson, I think he was initially in Pain of Salvation, who's a band we've done some shows with. Then I was in a band with him briefly called Audio Plastic. And so I met him then, and I just thought he was a really nice guy and just a ridiculously good bass player. No one should be that good on bass. He's just phenomenal. It's like he thinks it and it happens on his fingers. It's beautiful. So when I had the chance to ask him, it was like a no-brainer for me. So I asked all 3 and I was just really lucky because they all said yes, which is just, he didn't expect that to happen. So I had my dream team behind me, which is amazing.
Yeah, that sounds like awesome.
So the question was, how did the
band form?
Well, it was a strange story because it wasn't really meant to happen. The story is my main band, Threshold, we did an album called The Legends of the Shires back in 2017. And then we started working on a sequel to that called The Fall of the Shires. I had this story and I had some ideas. So I put the idea to the band and they seemed happy with it. But I think while we got into the actual process of writing the record, they found it a bit constraining because I think they wanted to write some songs that weren't part of the story. So in the end, we dropped the idea, which was fine. And we made an album called Dividing Lines. But it left me I had the opening song, the closing song, which were kind of part of the story. And they were called the Full Part 1, the Full Part 2. And they didn't work on a Threshold album unless they were telling the beginning and the end of the story. So I thought, well, I'll just make the album for myself. I'll just have fun at home. It'll be a private project. Maybe I'll just press one vinyl at the end just for me, just so I can have it a secret album on my shelf. So that was the plan. So I programmed all the drums. I played and programmed everything else myself. I even sung it, which was just because it was for me. It was just a one-man project. And then, I never even thought of it being released or anything. It was just one of those things I wanted to do for fun. But one day I was talking to a friend from a record label and he asked what I was doing. So I told him and he said, well, send it along. And I'd love to have a listen. And then next thing I know, he's offered me a record deal, which was just completely unexpected. It's one of those things you're desperate for record deals all your life, and then suddenly one shows up when you're not even expecting it. So at that point, I thought, well, I need a band. I can't just have it all me on the record. I better get a band in. So that's when I thought of the three guys, and like I say, just luckily they all said yes. So it was a bit of a dream, really.
Yeah, it sounds like everything just kind of came together like it was meant to be.
Yeah, it felt like the record needed to be made for some reason. Ever since I came up with the story about 5 years ago, at the time I thought, well, that's a bit dark. It's about this guy who becomes a king, and then he's kind of comes up with ways that he can reduce the population. It's a very dark story. I thought, oh, I could never make that. But then it kind of matured on me over the years, and when it came to making the Threshold album, I thought, well, I've got quite a fully formed story now. I need to see this through. And then, like I say, when we didn't do it with Threshold, it found another way to get told.
Okay. Have you done vocals before on any other projects?
No, that's the weird thing. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to sing all my songs, and then I met Farah, my wife, and she ended up singing everything for me. So I do backing vocals with Threshold. I've always done that, and I sing a fair amount of the demos for Threshold as well when I write songs for them. So I wasn't unfamiliar with singing, but it was never something I really thought I'd actually do for real. So I was kind of surprised when they said, we'll sign you. I was waiting for them to say, of course, you'll have to get in a rock singer for this one, because I'm not really that big rock voice. I'm more of a prog singer. But they didn't. So I kind of got away with it. Don't tell anybody, but somehow I got away with it. And I'm the singer in a band, which I never saw coming, I must say.
Well, I think your vocals are fantastic. It sounds like you've been doing it forever. So it sounds great.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
So I know you mentioned like there's a story. If people, I guess, who are like new fans to Oblivion Protocol, how would we go about listening to this full story if we kind of wanted to start from the beginning?
I don't think you need to go back to the Legends of the Shires album, the Threshold one. It's a continuation of that story, but I don't think you need to hear it for this. I think where there is a continuity, there's quite a lot of Easter eggs. So if you were into the Legends album, you'll hear lots of references, little sound design moments, lots of ideas that kind of follow through. So it's quite nice. Even the melody of the first song is the same as the melody of the first song on Legends. So it'll be hopefully a nice thing for Threshold fans. But if you're a new listener, no, it stands alone on its own. And it's just the story, as I said, of a guy who becomes the king and makes some bad decisions. And the Shire, which is where he lives, it just becomes a much darker place as a result. But if you go back to the whole story of the Legends album, there's quite a strong tie-in. At the end of that album, the guy in the story gets a choice of what he's going to do next. There's this song on there called Lost in Translation, and the lyrics say maybe a writer, maybe a king, a star, a fighter, and a few other things. And that was at the point at which I thought, well, actually, what happens if he becomes a king? That could be quite an interesting story. And that's really how the whole thing began.
Oh yeah, I'm really excited. I know like I love the fact that there's like a story behind it, because it kind of makes the album like more deep and like something to look forward to versus like, okay, it's a bunch of songs, it's great, but this time it's like a story. So it's like 2 in 1.
Yeah, and the songs all flow together. It's as much about the transitions between the songs as it is the songs. You just get to the end of one song and start the next one. They all flow in like a proper concept album, which is something for me as a kind of writer and producer I'm really excited about. It's not just about making a bunch of songs. It's about making that whole story and making it flow. So hopefully it's a really fun listen for people.
I think it will be. I do have to ask though, how did the name of the band come along?
Well, that was quite funny because it was while I was in the mindset that it was for nobody to hear, what I thought was it's going to be heard by nobody, seen by nobody. So I thought, well, I need a name that reflects that, because I've got to, if I'm going to make one vinyl for myself, I've got to at least have a name on the cover. So I thought, well, my mission plan for this is really to consign it to Oblivion. So that's really, its protocol was Oblivion. So it became Oblivion Protocol. So that was the real reason for the name. And then when it got signed, obviously that wasn't the reason for the name anymore, but I thought, well, I love the name now. It just stuck with me. It's one of those things, again, you spend years waiting for a record deal and suddenly one comes along. It's the same when you're forming a band and you think, oh no, I've got to think of a band name. It's one of those awful moments where you think, well, this could take years thinking of a name, but this one just kind of came. It was kind of weird. Like you say, maybe it was all just meant to be.
I think it was. So that goes to the next question. Are there any collaborations that we'll see on the album from songs that we haven't heard yet?
From songs you haven't heard, no. So the basic core of the album is the four of us. So me playing keys and singing, and then Root on guitar, Simon on bass, and Darby on drums. But as I mentioned earlier, the songs, the full part 1 and the full part 2, were originally written for Threshold. So I thought it'd be nice to get Carl Groom, the Threshold guitarist, to play the solos, because I kind of sort of structured out the solo with him in mind. So he very kindly said yes, which is nice. It kind of gives it that sort of stamp of authority. Yes, this is an official Threshold side project. So he's on the opening song, which you've heard, and then he does a variation on that solo on the last song as well. But beyond that, no. I think the other tie-ins probably are more the artists. So the guy who designed the album cover used to design a lot of the Threshold covers a while ago. He did some of our classic ones like Hypothetical and Subsurface. So I thought it'd be great to go back to him, to get him to interpret what the Shires look like when they've fallen. And I think he's done a fantastic job.
Okay, is that kind of like the inspiration behind the album art, the Shires falling?
Well, sorry, say again.
Is that kind of the inspiration behind like the album cover photo, like the Shires are falling, or is there something different behind that?
Yes, so we had it's funny actually, because somebody said to me the other day, why didn't you ask the person who did the album cover for Legends of the Shires? I never thought of that. That would have been a great idea. So this girl, Elena, had done this great cover for the Legends of the Shires album, and it shows this lovely lush green land with some interesting features, and it's just, you can see that's the world where a story's about to happen, and that's what we wanted. So for the Oblivion Protocol album, I asked the artist Thomas to imagine that land after it had fallen, and that was his brief, and this is what he came up with, and I think he's done a beautiful job.
Yeah, I think so too. It's really nice, and when I saw it, I was just like, wow, this album, like, I don't know, there's just something about it that it made me want to listen to it. And then when I listened to it, I was like, this is fantastic. Like, this is a great, great album.
If the cover did that, really good to know. I remember when we did the Hypothetical cover, which is a lovely picture of it's kind of a city built on a floating rock floating above the land. And it's one of those covers you look at, you think, I can tell what this album sounds like. And we had a lot of people said they bought the album just for the cover. They didn't know who we were. And you think that's what you want from a cover. You know, it speaks to you and says, you want to hear what's on this. So I'm hoping this one does the same.
I think it's doing that. It definitely intrigued my interest when I first saw it. I was like, this looks good.
Good to know.
So are there any plans for a tour with this album?
Honest answer, not yet. It's early days really. So the album's out next week. I'll just have to see if anyone wants to hear it first. I'm hoping it'll sell a few copies, and then we'll see whether we can get some agents interested in booking some shows for us. So the answer is I very much hope so. I've spent 30 years hiding behind the keyboards, being the guy in the background, quite often not lit. And I'm quite interested to see what it's like being the guy at the front. It's not something I've ever thought about, but it's you kind of think, well, life's long and there's time to try lots of things. So I would love to try that. So hopefully we'll have some news in a couple of months.
Yeah, for sure. So how does it feel coming out with a new album with a new band?
Really odd, to be honest. I didn't see it coming, and it's not meant to compete in any way with Threshold. It's purely meant to be like a side project, a bit like all those kind of Star Wars spin-offs that you get, Obi-Wan and all the other movies they've been making recently. I just wanted it to be that. It's the same world, but it's different cast. It's a slightly different flavor, but it comes from the same world. So, but yeah, I mean, I really didn't see it coming. I had no concept that I was going to be forming another band. I already had Threshold, very happy with that. Got no plans to leave that or anything. And I already had League of Lights with my wife. So I was full already, So to take on another one seemed a little bit crazy. But when the opportunity was there, I thought I've got to go for it, And it'll be the same with live shows. It'll feel like way too much, all this whole new learning. What's it mean to be a front man? Learning the lyrics, never even had to really worry about that sort of thing. So loads for me to think about. But when you get those opportunities, you just have to take them.
Yeah, for sure. Did you run into like any sort of challenges when recording this album or when putting it together?
No, not really. Just surprisingly, all just fell into place. It was great. All the guys recorded their parts at their own studios, and they sent them in, and they were perfect. I mean, it couldn't have gone better. I'm just a very happy guy right now.
Yeah. So did you guys like all record it in your own separate studios, and then it all just got put together?
Yeah. So the demos that I made were pretty full and pretty complete. That's how we work these days. You can kind of hear it sounds pretty much like the final record. So the guys knew what they were expected to do. They played all the riffs, all the parts, but they brought their personality in. So all the drum, you can tell it's Darby. All his fills are his kind of fills. Root played all his own solos. I'd given him some guide solos, but he pretty much ignored them and played something 10 times better. So that was cool. And then Simon on bass. I didn't realize how much you could do with bass to take it beyond what the demo says, because the demo was kind of just structured bass lines, nice and simple. And he's just put in these gorgeous moments. I just want to listen to the album just to hear the bass. It's absolutely stunning. So really, really excited that they all brought their own flavor and it will work when we put it together.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, it really just sounds like this is something that was meant to be. It seems like everything just fell into place perfectly, like it was just always supposed to happen.
I hope so. And I'm kind of hoping that the next 2 sequels that I have planned are also meant to happen. So when I wrote the story, I realized I had 2 more stories, because this one's kind of a dark one. It's a bit like the second Star Wars album, where you think, well, that was a bit dark and it doesn't feel finished yet. And it's not. I've got 2 more stories to come. So I'm very much hoping I get a chance to make those as well.
I hope so. I would think it would be a shame if we didn't get to hear those too. So do you have any interesting behind the scenes stories from the studio?
Well, honestly, because it was just me in the studio. And no, I did the most uninteresting stories of studio ever. I just sat in this room, you can see behind me, and I just sat staring at the screen, producing it, mixing it, mastering it. So no, sorry. I think that the days where you go into a big studio and the record company come in and bring you bags and bags of cocaine, and then you all have 15 divorces and throw things out of hotel windows, it's never been who Threshold are, and it's certainly not who I am. So no, we're just hardworking musicians trying to do our best to make a good record. Terrible for interviews, but hopefully good for making records.
Well, the good thing is you already have a story in the album, so that kind of counts for that.
That's true.
So besides the story, are there any other themes that we'll see in the album?
I think the main thing that's going to be fun are the Easter eggs. Hearing all those little references back to the Legends album. There's quite a few, whether it's a melody or a lyric or a sound effect, or I've done quite a lot where you think, oh, I know that. And I really wanted it to feel like it tied in together. And the same way when you watch a Star Wars spin-off movie, you love it when you see one of the ships from the old movies or one of the landscapes. You think, oh, I recognize that place. And I wanted that same flavor in musical form. So I'm kind of hoping that's a fun thing. And I'm going to, in some ways, continue that through the next 2 sequels as well. Although I think they'll start to take on their own personalities as they go. But it's just fun. It's, as a writer and a producer, it's great making songs. That's really fun. But when you can then tie them all together and make a story out of them, that's even more fun. And then when you can start putting in Easter eggs from a previous album as well, it was so enjoyable to do. You can probably tell from how I'm talking, but I've loved every moment of making this record. Absolute dream project. Can't wait for the next one.
Can you tell us about some of these Easter eggs so we can be on the lookout for them?
Oh, wow. Okay. No, you got to listen out for them. I mean, if you know both albums, then you'll probably notice the full part 1. The verse melody is the same as the Shire part 1. And I changed the chords and everything, but I wanted that just so I'm back in that world again. And even one of the first things I did for Legends of the Shires was there's a song on there called The Man Who Saw Through Time. And I wanted a way to kind of depict the moving through time in a sonic sort of form. And I noticed that the Man Who Saw Through Time, the letters TMWSTT, were also letters of days of the week. So I thought, that's interesting. So I converted them to Tuesday, Monday, whatever they were, Saturday. And I got this computer voice. I had this really old speech synthesizer. And I got this computer voice to say the words. And then I sped it up and up and up until it just becomes this really fast sort of noise. It sounds like you're moving through time. And I thought that kind of works for depicting what I'm trying to say. So I've gone back to that sound quite a lot. So you'll hear it at the beginning on the full part 1, where he's trying to decide what he's going to do next. Maybe a writer, a king, a star, a fighter. You hear all those words spinning around and it's the same voice until it finally settles on king, which is supposed to be kind of like some sort of celestial roulette wheel, choosing what's he going to be, and he becomes the king. So that's one of the sounds I brought back in. And I use that voice quite a lot through the album. It was on Stars and Satellites as well on the Threshold album. And I've kind of brought back the wording that I used on there to bring that in to be part of the story. And it's partly nice because it's an Easter egg and it's kind of a nice reference and you feel kind of comfortable and familiar. But it's also nice because it just carries on the storytelling, which is the real point of it. So you can carry on with that narrative idea. So there you go. There's a couple. There's a few more in there as well.
Okay, good. We got some of them. So I do want to be conscious of your time. So I do just have one last question here for you. Is there any message you'd like to give your fans about the new album?
Yeah, thank you for becoming fans for a start. I know when you got a new band and it's such a crowded marketplace, it's really hard to reach new people and to find people. So if you're into this stuff already, I really appreciate it. I hope you buy the album. The vinyl looks fantastic, so please buy that. And I hope you enjoy the record.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I know it's only a little bit of ways away till we get to listen to the final album, and I'm sure I know myself, I'm very excited about it, so I'm sure lots of other people will be as well.
I appreciate that, and I'm sorry to hear they didn't send you a promo copy.
It is okay. I'll get a copy as soon as it comes out. So
Fantastic. I hope you enjoy it. Very nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for your time and nice to meet you. And thank you for doing this interview.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you.